"You're nothing but a freeloader," my dad snapped, then dragged my bags to the door. I was kicked out of the house I owned. They thought I was a joke, so I made one phone call to my lawyer and set a trap they never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The migraine had been pounding behind my left eye for 6 hours, a dull, throbbing drumbeat of stress. I was huddled over my laptop at the kitchen island, trying to finalize a difficult UI/UX wireframe for a client when the shouting started. It wasn't the first time, not by a long shot. Not since my Aunt Denise had arrived, anyway. "I'm sick of it, Richard," Denise's voice, sharp and cutting, sliced through my concentration. "She sits there all day, clicking that stupid little mouse, and expects you and Marlene to wait on her hand and foot. It's your house, for goodness sake." I winced, closing my eyes. My house. That was the detail they always seemed to forget. My father, Richard, stormed into the kitchen. At 62, he was a man defined by his bitterness. His forced early retirement from construction management had left him with too much time and a fragile ego. He pointed a thick finger at me. "She's right, Sarah, we're done. You're 29 years old, you're nothing but a freeloader." The word hit me like a physical slap. "Freeloader?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The migraine pulsed violently. "Dad, what are you even talking about? I'm working." "That's not work," he boomed, his face turning a blotchy red. "That's a hobby. I worked with my hands, I built things. You sit in your pajamas and tap on a keyboard. You haven't contributed a single thing to this household since we let you stay here." "Let me stay here?" The room tilted. I had bought this 5-bedroom colonial 2 years ago. I'd poured my savings into the down payment and had been meticulously paying the mortgage, the property taxes, and every single utility bill ever since. I had invited them to move in with me rent-free when Dad lost his job and their finances crumbled. My mother, Marlene, drifted in from the living room, wringing her hands. She wouldn't meet my eyes. At 60, she still worked part-time at a flower shop, and I knew she was exhausted. But she was also terrified of my father's temper, a fear that had calcified into complete submission. "Dad, this is my house," I said, my voice shaking. Aunt Denise, 65 and smelling of stale perfume and entitlement, smirked from the doorway. "Oh, the little girl is claiming the house now, is she? Richard, are you going to let her speak to you that way?" "You're disrespectful," Dad snapped. He grabbed my laptop bag from the counter and then, to my horror, marched down the hall to my bedroom. I heard a crash. I ran after him, my mother and aunt trailing behind. He was pulling my suitcases from the closet. He unzipped one and began yanking clothes from my drawers, throwing them haphazardly into the bag. "Dad, stop, what are you doing?" I cried, trying to grab a handful of shirts. He shoved me back, not hard, but enough to make me stumble. "I'm doing what I should have done a year ago. You're out. Go be a successful designer somewhere else. Go rely on yourself for a change." I looked at my mother, pleading. "Mom, please tell him to stop. You know the truth." Marlene finally looked at me, her eyes flat and tired. "Sarah, maybe it's time you stopped relying on us. Your father, he's under a lot of stress. You're young, you can manage on your own. We need our space." Relying on them? The words didn't make sense. It was like living in an alternate reality. I paid for the roof over their heads, the food in their pantry, the electricity that powered the television Denise watched 18 hours a day. Denise chimed in. "She's probably got all sorts of money saved up from her little computer game. She'll be fine. Good riddance." My father zipped the 2 bags, the seams straining. He dragged them down the hardwood floor, leaving a long, thin scratch in the finish I just had redone. He hauled them to the front door, opened it, and tossed them onto the porch. "Get out," he said. My migraine was a blinding, nauseating curtain of pain. The shock was so profound, so absolute, that I couldn't even form an argument. They had created a narrative, that I was the child, the burden, the guest who had overstayed her welcome in their home, and they believed it. Denise's poison, watered by my father's pride and my mother's weakness, had rotted the entire foundation of our family. I looked at my father's furious face, my aunt's triumphant sneer, and my mother's cowardly retreat into the living room. I didn't argue, I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I walked to the hall closet, took my car keys from the hook, grabbed my purse. ND put on my shoes. I stepped past my father, picked up my 2 hastily packed, overflowing suitcases from the porch and walked to my car. I put the bags in the trunk, got into the driver's seat, and started the engine. As I pulled away from the curb, I looked back. They were all standing in the doorway, watching me go. My father looked proud. My aunt looked victorious. My mother just looked gone. I drove to the nearest hotel, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. As I checked in, the numbness began to fade, replaced by a cold, sharp, clarifying rage. They had kicked me out of my own house. The betrayal was worse than any lie they could have told. The first 24 hours were a blur of beige walls and bad hotel coffee. The migraine finally broke, leaving behind the hollow, exhausted ache of profound emotional trauma. I sat on the edge of the stiff queen-sized bed at the extended stay hotel and let the reality of it wash over me. My own parents, goaded by my parasitic aunt, had thrown me out. They had called me a freeloader while standing on my floors, under my roof. I replayed the scene 100 times. My father's rage, my mother's blank eyes, the thud of my suitcases on the porch, the click of the front door closing behind me. I cried for the family I thought I had, for the mother I thought loved me, for the father I had desperately tried to support. I cried for my own stupidity. Why had I never seen this coming? I'd seen his pride. I'd seen her weakness. I'd seen Denise's jealousy. But I never, in a million years, thought they would converge into this. By the second day, the grief began to curdle. It sharpened, hardened, and cooled into something else. It turned into resolve. I was a UI/UX designer. My entire job was to look at a broken, illogical, user-unfriendly system and redesign it to be functional, efficient, and intuitive. My family was a broken system. My father's pride was a bug. My aunt's manipulation was a virus. My mother's complicity was a critical failure of the security protocols. And I, the architect, had just been locked out. It was time for a complete redesign. I pulled out my laptop, the one piece of work equipment I'd had the foresight to grab in my purse, and opened my secure files. The deed to the house. The mortgage agreement with its automatic payments from my bank account. The property tax records, paid in full. The mountain of utility bills, water, gas, electric, internet, all in my name, all paid by me. I had been generous. I had been kind. I had been a loving daughter. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. They had mistaken my generosity for an obligation. They had rewritten the truth to fit their narrative, and in their story, I was the villain. Fine, if I was the villain, I would play the part. I made one phone call, not to them. Not yet. I called my mother, Marlene, on the 3rd day. I needed to know if there was any flicker of remorse, any crack in their united front. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up. Hello, her voice was wary. Mom, it's me. A heavy sigh. Sarah, where are you? Are you okay? I'm at a hotel, I said, keeping my voice flat. Mom, what happened? Why did you let him do that? I heard her cup the phone, her voice muffled. It's Sarah. I heard my father's voice boom in the background. Tell her to stop calling. Tell her we're done. Marlene came back on the line, her voice suddenly cold, echoing my father's script. Sarah, your father is right. You needed this. You needed a push. It's time for you to be an adult. We're doing fine here. Denise is cooking a lovely pot roast. You take care of yourself. Denise is cooking a pot roast. In my kitchen, using my gas. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. You're living in my house, the house I bought, the mortgage I pay. Oh, stop it with that, she snapped, and the sudden venom in her voice shocked me. You've held that over our heads for a year. My house, my house. It's a family home, Sarah, and your father and I, as the elders, are in charge of it. You were a guest. A guest who paid for everything. Don't be dramatic. Your father provided for you your whole life. This is the least you can do. Now, I have to go. Don't call here again until you're ready to apologize to your father." She hung up. I stared at the phone. Apologize to him. That was it. That was the moment the last shred of familial duty evaporated. The last drop of guilt, of doubt, of maybe I was too hard on them. It all vanished. They hadn't just kicked me out. They had stolen my home. They were squatters. They were thieves. And they were so blinded by their own self-righteous narrative that they couldn't see the cliff they were gleefully dancing toward. I sat back, a cold, calm certainty settling over me. They were arrogant. They were cruel. And they were, quite frankly, not very smart. They had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten who I was. I wasn't just Sarah the daughter. I was Sarah the owner. And the owner had just been illegally evicted. My hands were perfectly steady now. I picked up my phone again. This time, I didn't call my mother. I called the best real estate lawyer I could find. To understand how we got here, you have to understand my father. Richard was a man built on the idea of being a provider. His entire identity was wrapped up in his job as a construction manager, in the steel-toed boots, the hard hat, the authority of a man who yelled at contractors and made buildings rise from the dirt. He had provided for me, it was true. We'd had a stable, middle-class life. But that provision always came with an unspoken price: fealty. He was the king, and our home was his castle. Then, 2 years ago, his company restructured. They brought in younger, cheaper managers who understood software and logistics, and my 60-year-old father, with his paper blueprints and his gruff demeanor, was phased out. They called it early retirement. He called it an insult. Around the same time, I sold a small app I'd developed in my spare time to a larger tech firm. It wasn't a life-changing fortune, but combined with my savings from 6 years as a high-demand UI/UX designer, it was enough. I bought the house. A beautiful, 5-bedroom colonial in a quiet suburb with a home office for me and a big yard. A year ago, my parents' finances imploded. Dad's severance ran out, his pride wouldn't let him take a lesser job, and their mortgage on their small, aging house was becoming impossible. So, I made the offer. "Move in with me," I'd said, sitting at their old kitchen table. "Sell your house, pay off your debts, and just breathe, live with me, no rent. It's too much house for me anyway." My father had bristled. "I don't need charity from my daughter." "It's not charity, Dad," I'd insisted. "It's family. I have the space. You can help with the garden. Mom can have the front room for her flowers. It'll be good." My mother, Marlene, had cried with relief. She was so tired of the stress. Reluctantly, my father agreed. For the first 6 months, it was okay, tense, but okay. I worked in my office, he tinkered in the garage, and Mom planted roses. I paid for everything, and they simply existed. But I could feel my father's resentment building. I was the 29-year-old head of the household, and he was the 62-year-old retired guest. It ate at him. He started making comments. "Must be nice to sleep in," he'd grumble as I came down for coffee at 8:01 a.m., conveniently ignoring that I often worked until midnight. "That's a nice new car," he'd say about my modest sedan. "Easy to buy things when you don't have a mortgage, eh?" I'd gently remind him, "Dad, I have the mortgage. I have this mortgage." He would just wave his hand and walk away. Then 6 weeks ago, Aunt Denise arrived. Denise was my father's older sister. At 65, she was a professional victim. She lived on a meager disability check for an ailment that was always vague, but always debilitating enough to prevent her from working. She drifted from one relative's couch to another, a human storm cloud of jealousy and complaint. She arrived with 2 overstuffed bags for a short visit and immediately set up camp in the largest guest room. And she immediately set her sights on me. To Denise, my life was an affront. I was young, successful, and unmarried, and I owned a big, beautiful house. She couldn't stand it. and she saw, with a predator's instinct, the crack in my father's pride. She began her campaign in whispers. "Richard, it's just not right," I'd hear her murmur to him in the kitchen. "A young girl like that, lording it over her parents, making you live under her rules. She's on that computer all day. It's not natural. That's not a job, Richard. You're a man. This should be your house." "And that Marlene," she'd say to my mother. "She has you running around, but she's the one with all the money. Why, if this house were yours, you could sell it. You could take a real vacation. You could even help me out a little. My back has been terrible." She was an expert manipulator, and she was pushing on an open door. She gave my father's bitterness a voice. She gave my mother's weakness an excuse. She painted me as a spoiled, ungrateful child who was usurping my father's rightful place as patriarch. The freeloader narrative wasn't my father's. It was Denise's. He just adopted it as his own. She convinced them that by living in the house I bought and paid for, I was somehow taking advantage of them. That my work wasn't real, and that my financial independence was an illusion. In Denise's twisted world, I was the one who was the guest. The one who was the burden. I had tried to counter it. "Aunt Denise, my job is very real. It's how I pay for, well, all of this," I'd say, gesturing to the house. She would just smile, a thin, pitying smile. "Oh, of course, dear, whatever you say. Don't you worry your pretty little head about grown-up things." She infantilized me, belittled my career, and systematically poisoned my parents against me. She saw a comfortable life she wanted, and I was the only thing in her way. By convincing my father that the house was morally his, she was one step closer to convincing him to make it legally his. Kicking me out was the first, idiotic step in their deluded plan. They truly believed I would just go, and they could just stay. The betrayal wasn't just my father's anger or my mother's silence. It was the result of a cold, calculated campaign by an antagonist who had everything to gain. And she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. For the first few days in that sterile hotel room, my grief was a heavy blanket. But after the phone call with my mother, the blanket was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't a family dispute. This was a legal matter. My name, Sarah, means princess. My father used to call me that when I was little. Now, I was a princess who had been thrown out of her own castle by the court jester and the king's bitter, manipulative sister. It was time to stop acting like a victim and start acting like a strategist. My job as a UI/UX designer requires meticulous documentation. I design systems. I anticipate user behavior. I find flaws and I fix them. My father, mother, and aunt were users acting in an illogical, destructive way. It was time to introduce a hard stop. A fatal error message they couldn't click past. I didn't need to investigate much about the house. I had every document. I sat on the hotel bed, my laptop open, and created a new, password-protected folder. I labeled it Project Eviction. Inside, I saved the signed PDF of the original deed. Sarah M. Thompson, sole owner. I saved the mortgage agreement. Sarah M. Thompson, solely responsible. I downloaded the last 12 months of bank statements, highlighting every single mortgage and escrow payment, all auto-debited from my checking account. I downloaded the last year of utility bills, electric, gas, water, and the high-speed internet they all used, all in my name, all paid by me. The evidence was overwhelming. It was irrefutable. They weren't just morally wrong, they were legally indefensible. They were, in the cold, hard language of the law, tenants at will who had never paid a cent of rent and who had just illegally evicted the homeowner. My next call was to Mr. David Chen, a partner at the most respected real estate law firm in the city. I'd gotten his name from a colleague who had dealt with a difficult property dispute. "Mr. Chen," I said, my voice steady, "my name is Sarah Thompson. I need to hire you to help me evict my parents from my home." There was a brief pause. "That sounds complicated, Ms. Thompson." "It's actually very simple," I replied. "I am the sole owner of 1245 Maple Drive. I have the deed and all payment records. A year ago, I invited my parents to live with me, rent-free. 3 days ago, they and my aunt, who is also staying there, physically removed my belongings and locked me out of my own property. This time the pause was longer. They locked the owner out. Yes, they seem to be under the delusion that the house belongs to them. Ms. Thompson, he said, his voice suddenly sharp and focused, what they have done is called an illegal ouster or a self-help eviction, and it is highly, highly illegal. The fact that they are your parents complicates it emotionally, but not legally. You are the owner. They are occupants with no lease. They have zero right to be there without your permission, and they certainly have no right to remove you. A wave of validation washed over me. I wasn't crazy. Here's what we're going to do, he continued, and I could hear him typing. First, we are going to send a formal notice to quit. This is the first legal step in an eviction. It will be delivered by a sheriff's deputy to the occupants. Richard Thompson, Marlene Thompson, and Denise. What's her last name? Miller, I supplied, my father's sister. And Denise Miller. This notice will inform them that their tenancy at will is terminated and they have a set number of days. In this state, it's 14 to vacate the premises. 14 days, I repeated. They will almost certainly ignore it, he said plainly. They will likely call you screaming. You will not answer. You will not engage. You will forward all communications to me. When they fail to leave by the deadline, we will file a formal eviction complaint with the court. But, he added, we can also pursue a faster route. We can file for an immediate injunction to have you, the legal owner, reinstated to your property. Given the circumstances, a judge would likely grant it. I thought about it. I thought about going back while they were still there. No, I said, I don't want to go back while they're there. I want them out. Let's stick with the formal eviction. Understood, but we are also going to send a cease and desist letter with it, ordering them to not damage, alter, or remove any property from the home. I want a sheriff's deputy to deliver it. It will make the situation very real for them. My clever trap wasn't a complicated scheme. It was the simple, unassailable, and brutal power of the law they had so arrogantly ignored. There's one more thing, Mr. Chen said. You mentioned your aunt, Denise Miller. My paralegal will do a quick background check. People who pull stunts like this, it's rarely their first time. Thank you, Mr. Chen. Please proceed immediately. I hung up the phone and felt powerful. The shift from passive victim to active strategist was complete. I was no longer the sad daughter in a hotel room. I was the client. I was the owner. I was the one holding all the cards. They thought I was a freeloader playing on a computer. They were about to find out how much that freeloader was willing to pay for a good lawyer. The welcome packet from Mr. Chen's office was delivered by a uniformed sheriff's deputy 2 days later. I knew this because I had paid for a process server to confirm delivery, and I was, admittedly, parked in my car down the street, watching. I saw the deputy walk up the path I had paid to have landscaped. I saw him ring the doorbell of the front door I had chosen. And I saw my father, Richard, answer it. He took the thick envelope, looked at the official sheriff's department stamp on the return address, and his face went white. He tore it open right there on the porch. I watched him read the first page, his posture shifting from arrogant to apoplectic in seconds. He crumpled the letter, threw it on the ground, and slammed the door so hard I heard the rattle from 50 yards away. I smiled, started my car, and drove back to the hotel. The trap was set. The timer had started. My phone, which had been silent for 5 days, lit up less than 10 minutes later. It was my father. I let it go to voicemail. Voicemail 1. Sarah, what is this? What is this you've done? You're sending a sheriff to my house. You're evicting me. You call me back right now. You have lost your mind. He called again. I let it go to voicemail. Voicemail 2. Sarah, this is your father. You think this is a joke? You think you can threaten me? I'm your father. You have no right. This is my home. You call me this instant, or you're going to be in so much trouble. Then an hour later, a new number, my mother. I let it go to voicemail. Voicemail 3, Marlene's voice high and panicky. Sarah, please, what have you done? Your father is. He's furious. He says you're suing us. A sheriff came to the door, our neighbors saw. How could you humiliate us like this? Denise is sick, she's had to go lie down. You have to call this off. Just come home and we can talk about this. This is not right, Sarah. You're tearing this family apart. Come home and talk. After they threw me out, you're tearing this family apart, after they had shattered it. The lack of self-awareness was staggering. I dutifully forwarded the audio files to Mr. Chen, as instructed. His reply was simple. Good, they're rattled. Do not, under any circumstances, respond. The best part, however, came that evening. Mr. Chen called me. Well, Ms. Thompson, your aunt is quite the character. What did you find? My paralegal is very good. It seems Ms. Denise Miller has a pattern. She was involved in a similar dispute in 2019 with a cousin in Ohio. Stayed with him for 3 months, convinced him his son was taking advantage of him, and the son was forced to take legal action to get her removed from the property. Before that, in 2017, she was named in a small claims suit by a former landlord in Florida for non-payment of rent and, get this, trying to sell the furniture that came with the apartment. She seems to believe that possession is 9/10 of the law. So she's a con artist, I said, the pieces clicking into place. She's a bottom feeder, Ms. Thompson. She finds a weak-willed host and attaches herself. Your father's pride was her entry point. The house was the prize. This legal notice has likely terrified her, because she, unlike your parents, has probably seen this before. This information was gold. It wasn't just my father's pride. It was a calculated, practiced manipulation by a serial grifter. The first major confrontation happened on day 7. I was driving to the grocery store when my phone rang. It was my father again. This time, I answered. I put the phone on speaker and hit record, a feature I'd enabled, as it was legal in my state with one-party consent. What? I answered, my voice cold. Don't you what me, young lady? He roared. I got your little letter. What is the meaning of this, your evicting your own parents? I'm evicting the people who are illegally occupying my home, yes, I said calmly. Your home, he scoffed, but I could hear the tremor of fear under the rage. This is a family home. I've been a father to you for 29 years. That's what this is about. A piece of paper? You'd throw your mother and me out on the street over a piece of paper. You threw me out onto the street, I corrected him. You threw me out of the house I bought, that I pay for, that has my name on the deed, the mortgage, and every single bill. You called me a freeloader. So, I've decided to stop freeloading off of you. You said I should rely on myself. That's what I'm doing. There was a sputtering silence. He had no response to that. You're a snake, he finally spat. You're trespassing, Dad, you have. I checked the date. 7 more days to vacate the property before I file the writ of eviction with the court. Have a nice day. Wait, he yelled, desperate. You can't. Denise, get on this phone, tell her. I heard a fumbling, and then my aunt's venomous voice came on the line. You ungrateful little brat. After everything your father has done for you, we are not going anywhere. This house belongs to your father. He's the man of the house. Hello, Denise, I said, my voice dangerously sweet. How's your cousin in Ohio, the one whose son had to get a restraining order against you in 2019? Or how about that landlord in Florida? Did you ever pay him back for the couch you tried to sell? Dead, silence. I had never heard such a perfect, beautiful, absolute silence in my entire life. The line was so quiet I could hear her sharp, panicked breathing. She had been exposed. What are you talking about? She finally stammered. My lawyer is very good, Auntie, I said. He knows all about you. He knows you're a grifter. And now, so do I. You have 7 days to get out of my house before I add your name to a civil suit for damages. You preyed on my father's pride, and you're going to jail if you touch one more thing in my home. She started to shriek, a string of poorly executed threats and obvious lies. You're lying, you're making it up. I'll sue you for slander. Good luck, I said. Tell my father the clock is ticking. I hung up. I sat in the grocery store parking lot, my heart hammering, but I was smiling. The first crack in their fortress wasn't a crack, it was a gaping hole. I had just shattered the antagonist's main weapon, her credibility, and my father had just heard the whole thing. The silence on their end was immediate. No more voicemails, no more angry calls. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that told me everything I needed to know. The panic had set in. My aunt, I was sure, was in full damage control mode, trying to convince my father that I was lying, that it was all a trick. But the seed of doubt had been planted. My father was prideful, but he wasn't stupid. He just heard his sister, his primary instigator, reduced to panic sputtering. The case, as Mr. Chen called it, was building itself. But the real target for me had never been Denise. It was my mother. My father's betrayal was fueled by pride, Denise's by greed. But my mother's betrayal was one of weakness, and that, somehow, hurt the most. I had to break the spell. I had to give her one last chance to see the truth. On day 10, with 4 days left on the notice to quit, I sent my mother an email. The subject line was, "The truth." The body of the email contained no emotional pleas. No, how could you? It was just facts. It was a digital version of the project eviction folder. I attached the PDF of the fully executed deed to 1245 Maple Drive. I attached the PDF of the mortgage agreement. I attached a simple, clear spreadsheet I'd created. Column A, month. Column B, mortgage payment. Column C, gas bill. Column D, electric bill. Column E, water bill. Column F, internet bill. I included a final row at the bottom. Total financial contribution from Richard and Marlene Thompson, $0. I wrote only one line at the top of the email. Mom, he kicked me out of the house I have paid for every single month. These are the facts. He is being manipulated by a con artist. See attached background check on Denise Miller. You have 4 days to make a choice. After that, this is out of my hands and the court will take over. Sarah. I hit send, then I waited. The response was faster than I expected. 2 days later, 2 days before the deadline, my phone rang. It was my mother. I answered, "Hello, Mom." Sarah, her voice was broken. She was sobbing, a deep, racking series of sobs that sounded like they'd been held in for days. Sarah, I didn't know, I didn't look, he was so angry all the time, and Denise, she just kept saying, I didn't. Oh, Sarah, what's happening? What's happening, Mom? I said, my voice firm but not unkind, is that I am king my house back. What did you think was going to happen? I don't know, she wailed. I guess I thought you'd just be mad for a while and then we'd just, I don't know, Richard said the house was, it was his right as the patriarch. That the deed was just a formality because your credit was better. He believed it, Sarah. Denise convinced him. And you believed him. I wanted to, she whispered. It was easier. Oh, Sarah, what he did. And Denise, I read that thing about her. That's who she is. She's been telling your father that when you gave up on the house, they could sell it. They were looking at real estate listings, Sarah. They were going to sell your house. The coldness returned. They weren't just kicking me out. They were planning to liquidate my single greatest asset and steal my life savings. Mom, I said, the steel back in my voice. The notice expires in 48 hours. What are you going to do? He won't leave, she cried. He says you're bluffing. He says a daughter would never, that you'd never do it. He's in the living room right now with Denise, and they're watching a game show. They're just acting like nothing is wrong. Are you bluffing, Mom? Are you going to stand by him when the sheriff shows up to remove him? Because that is what is happening. On Friday at 9:00 a.m., the deadline expires and Mr. Chen is filing the writ. A constable will be there to physically remove you. This was the second, more powerful confrontation. This was the moment I presented the irrefutable proof, and it had worked. The spell was broken. No, she said, her voice changing. The panic was replaced by a new, shaky resolve, the sound of a spine stiffening for the first time in 30 years. No, I I'm packing a bag. Where are you? Can I come to you? I'm at the Hawthorne Suites on Route 4, I said. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said and hung up. I sat on the hotel bed, my heart pounding. This changed things. The alliance was broken. The united front that had thrown me out was now just my arrogant father and his grifting sister. And they had no idea that their primary shield, their enabler, had just abandoned them. 48 hours, the clock was ticking. Friday morning, 9:01 a.m. The 14-day notice period had officially expired. My mother had been with me at the hotel for 2 days. She was a wreck, alternating between tears of guilt and flashes of rage at Richard and Denise. She told me they hadn't even noticed she was gone for the first 5 hours. My father had simply called her, annoyed, to ask when dinner would be ready. When she'd told him, "I'm with Sarah," he had just grunted and hung up. He was so far into his delusion that he couldn't comprehend the reality of his situation. Mr. Chen had been true to his word. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, he had filed the writ of possession with the court. And, as part of the legal process for an illegal ouster, he had arranged for a civil standby. 2 police officers to accompany me to my home to reclaim it. I wasn't just kicked out anymore. I was a legal owner executing a court-sanctioned retrieval of my property. I had also, per my lawyer's advice, called a locksmith. He was scheduled to meet us there at 9:30 a.m. The showdown was set. My mother, looking pale and small, sat in the passenger seat of my car. I pulled onto my street and parked behind the 2 police cruisers and the locksmith's van. The officers, a man and a woman, met me on the sidewalk. "Ms. Thompson?" the female officer asked. "Yes, that's me. This is my mother, Marlene," the officer nodded. "Okay, ma'am, we have the court order here. We're just here to keep the peace while you regain entry to your home. You have a locksmith." "Yes, he's right there." "Good, let's go." We walked up the path. My hands weren't shaking. I felt nothing but a cold, hard sense of purpose. I rang the doorbell. No answer. I rang it again. I could hear the television blaring inside, a game show. The officer knocked, loud and hard. "Police, open the door." The television sound was abruptly cut off. I heard footsteps, then my father's voice, muffled. "What is it now?" The door opened. My father, Richard, was in his bathrobe. His hair was a mess. When he saw me, his face darkened with rage. "Sarah, I told you not to." Then he saw the 2 police officers standing behind me. His jaw snapped shut. "Richard Thompson?" the male officer asked. "Yes. What's this about?" "Sir, we're here to enforce a legal writ of possession for this property on behalf of the owner, Ms. Sarah Thompson. The notice period has expired. You are required to vacate the premises immediately." My father looked at me, then at the officers, then back at me. "What? No, that's ridiculous. This is my house. She's my daughter." "Sir, we're not here to debate ownership. We have a court order. The house belongs to her. You, your wife, and Ms. Denise Miller were named in the order. You need to leave." Right on cue, Aunt Denise appeared behind him, clutching her own robe. "What's going on?" "Richard, who are—" "Oh no." She saw me. She saw the police. And the grifter's mask fell. I saw pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes. "It's over, Denise," I said, my voice ringing out in the morning air. "You can't do this," my father roared, his face turning purple. "I won't leave. You'll have to drag me out." "We can do that, sir," the officer said, his hand moving toward his belt. "But it would be much easier if you just complied." Just then, my mother stepped out from behind me. "Richard," she said. He looked at her. His rage faltered, replaced by genuine confusion. "Marlene, what are you doing with her? I told you to come home." "This isn't our home, Richard," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "I'm not coming home. This is Sarah's house. You've been lied to by her." She pointed a trembling finger at Denise. "Marlene, you shut your mouth," Denise shrieked. "No," my mother shouted, and it was the loudest I'd ever heard her. You did this. You came into her house, you ate her food, and you poisoned my husband against his own daughter. You told him they could sell it. You're a thief." The public humiliation was glorious. Denise looked like she'd been struck. My father looked back and forth between them, his entire reality crumbling. Marlene, sell it? What? What is she talking about? She's a con artist, Dad, I said calmly. She has a history of this, I have the proof. She was playing you. My father stared at his sister, and in that moment he finally saw her. He saw the parasite. Locksmith, I said, turning my back on them, you can begin. The locksmith stepped forward with his drill. The sound of it hitting the lock was the sound of finality. Wait, stop, my father yelled. You can't, all my things, my tools, my clothes. You'll have 48 hours to arrange for a moving company to retrieve your belongings, I said, quoting my lawyer. My mother will be here to supervise. You and Denise are not to set foot on this property again. If you do, I will have you arrested for trespassing. My father deflated. The fight went out of him. He looked for the first time like a 62-year-old defeated man in a bathrobe. Denise, however, made one last, desperate lunge. She tried to push past the officer. You can't do this to me, I have rights, I'm disabled. The female officer blocked her path with an arm. Ma'am, you can either walk off this property or you can be arrested. It's your choice. Denise froze. She looked at me with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. I just smiled. She turned wordlessly and shuffled past my father down the walk and onto the sidewalk. My father looked at my mother. Marlene, he pleaded. Goodbye, Richard, she said, and turned her back on him. He stared at her, then at me. There was no apology, no remorse, just the blank, hollow shock of defeat. He turned, walked back inside, and we heard him stomping up the stairs. He'll get his things, my mother said quietly. 10 minutes later, my father and Denise walked down the path, carrying 2 bags each. They didn't look at us. They got into Denise's old, beat-up car and drove away. The locksmith finished. He handed me a new, shiny set of keys. It's done, ma'am. I took the keys. I walked up to my front door, my door. I put the key in the lock and opened it. I walked inside. It was quiet. The only sound was my mother crying softly behind me. Welcome home, Mom, I said. This was the climax. The house was mine. The 3 weeks that followed were a surreal cleanup, both physically and emotionally. The house felt tainted. Denise had left her guest room a disaster, with trash and old magazines piled in the corners. My father's workshop in the garage was in a similar state of disarray, tools left out to rust. It was as if their inner chaos had manifested in the space around them. My mother and I worked in near silence for the first few days, packing their things into boxes. It was a strange, sad process, like dismantling a life I once knew. We packed my father's clothes, his old construction trophies, and the few possessions Denise had brought with her. When the moving company, which I paid for, came to collect the boxes, my mother cried as she watched them load my father's favorite armchair. He has nothing, Sarah, she whispered, watching the truck pull away. He has no home, he has her. He made that choice, Mom, I said, not unkindly. He chose his pride, and he chose his sister over his daughter, and over you. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I know, it's just 40 years, it's hard to just turn it off. You don't have to, I said, but you don't have to live with it either. The downfall of Richard and Denise was swift and total. My mother, with my full support, filed for divorce. My father, in his arrogance, tried to fight it, claiming half her assets, which were non-existent and demanding alimony. But my mother had Mr. Chen on her side now. The illegal ouster and the clear evidence of dissipation of assets, their plan to sell my house and Denise's undue influence gave my mother all the leverage. The divorce was settled quickly. My father got nothing. He and Denise, as I found out later, ended up in a tiny one-bedroom apartment across town in a rundown complex by the highway. Their relationship, built on shared greed and resentment, quickly soured. My mother heard from a relative that they were fighting constantly, blaming each other for their downfall. Denise, the professional victim, had finally found a host she couldn't get rid of. And my father, the proud patriarch, was now a 62-year-old divorcee living in squalor with his manipulative sister. Justice, it turned out, was thorough. my mother and I started the long, difficult process of healing. She moved into the guest room, Denise's old room, which we had deep cleaned and repainted in a soft, calming blue. We started therapy, both individually and together. There were days of painful silence and days of tearful, raw conversations. "I will never be able to tell you how sorry I am, Sarah," she said to me one evening, months later, as we sat on the back patio. "I was a coward. I let them walk all over me, and I let them hurt you. That is a failure I will have to live with forever." "I know, Mom," I said, and I meant it. "But you're not a coward anymore. You left, you're here." It wasn't a perfect storybook ending. The scar of that betrayal would always be there. But we were building something new, something healthier, built on honesty instead of fear. I, on the other hand, felt a profound sense of peace. I had reclaimed my home, but more importantly, I had reclaimed my power. I had been tested in the most painful way possible, and I hadn't broken. I had been strategic. I had been strong. My house was finally my own again. The front door had a new lock. The scratch on the hardwood floor had been buffed out, and my home office was my sanctuary where I played on my computer, earning the money that paid for my freedom, my peace, and my new life with my mother. I was the freeloader who, it turned out, owned everything, and I was never, ever relying on anyone but myself again.